Welcome to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives, where we expose predators, dive into the minds of evildoers, and help you and your loved ones avoid them. I'm your host, Deborah Dobbs. I'm an author and victim advocate with a reputation for rattling cages. The next few episodes are going to focus on predators, the types that you might think of that are sociopaths or psychopaths. And I want to encourage everyone to look at a book that I've read and I'm rereading. It's called Dangerous Personalities, and it was written by Joe Navarro. If you haven't heard of Joe Navarro, he's a nonverbal communication expert. He wrote a book that's pretty well known called What Everybody is Saying. He's the founding member, one of the founding members of the FBI's behavioral analysis program. So he knows his stuff. I really like the book because he focuses more on the victims of what he calls dangerous personalities. He skips the clinical stuff. He's not a psychologist, and neither am I, and most of the people who listen aren't either. He said, if you want to know the why and the stories that lead people to act this way, Dangerous Personalities is not the book. Because when you are a victim of somebody who behaves like this, it doesn't matter why. The impact is the same. It doesn't matter how old somebody is. It doesn't matter what their childhood was like. The impact is the same. And his book includes so many accounts from the victims that I really appreciate it. He categorizes these dangerous personalities into 4 categories, and I'm not going to go through them all, but the one that we're going to be talking about is just the predator. And he says, of all the dangerous personalities, he writes, the predator causes the most harm. According to the renowned psychologist and psychopathy researcher Robert Hare, PhD, there are millions of these individuals out there. This is why there's every reason to think you have been, are, or will be in contact with one at some point in your life. Predators have only one goal: exploitation. And they see us, he writes, they see us as opportunities or obstacles in fulfilling their needs. If they need a car, they steal one. If they need money, they go after your grandparents' bank account. And if you've survived them, he writes, a part of you still dies. It might be trust, self-worth, dignity, or faith in others. And because we play by the rules, those of us who care about others and play by the rules and follow laws, they view us as saps, or he writes, objects of contempt, worthy of devaluation, derision, abuse, and perhaps elimination. This is perhaps my favorite part, he writes. Exquisitely skilled at detecting weaknesses, they target the vulnerable, the injured, the struggling, the gullible, the susceptible, the young, or those who can't fight back. Then they pounce, sometimes with subtlety, and at other times with feral ferocity. I'm going to read this last little part to you because this is directly related to the individuals that we're going to talk about in these next episodes. They know how to hide in prestigious organizations, perhaps a hospital, a charitable organization, a police department, a school, an athletic program, or a church, aware that occupational legitimacy confers both access and cover for their predation. The ones that we know, these famous ones, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, they are famous and they are very rare. They're a very small percentage of these people. He writes, every serial rapist, pimp, I'm going to stop because I really appreciate him putting pimp in there. I have other episodes, earlier episodes on trafficking. Be sure to listen to those because those pimps are psychopaths. They are the predators. The only difference between the predators like Al Capone, Jack the Ripper, a pimp, a pedophile, a trafficker, is their particular preference for exploitation or criminal behavior. He writes, while prisons are full of these individuals, far more walk the streets. They carry briefcases, laptops, backpacks, Bibles, soccer balls, and babies. They also carry knives, guns, machetes, ice picks, poison, and ropes. That might be your boss, your religious leader, your cube mate, your financial advisor, your child's camp counselor. I'll throw one in, your Brazilian jiu-jitsu professor, the black belt. There are all kinds of people. So that's why I like that book. And so I hope you read it because I think you'll appreciate some of these episodes even more. And I've asked someone to join me for these episodes, and that's Doug Deaton. Doug Deaton, after a career in law enforcement, he began a company called RDR, Private Investigations and Crisis Management. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time around cops. For about 15 years as a victim advocate, I worked alongside them or interacted with them consistently. And afterwards, it was more of an administrative role. And I've also been married to a retired detective for 10 years. I've observed, as anyone will, if you're around them long enough, that there are cops who climb the ranks. They aspire to be a chief someday, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're not a jerk. Maybe if you're like actually a good leader, then please do pursue that. And then there are guys and gals that they just want to be like police. These are the people that you want to arrive and get between you and the danger. They're just kind of like different breeds of cops, I guess. So Doug is one of those that you want to get in between you and the danger. And he's one of many I know who wouldn't hesitate to do that. Even now, into retirement, wouldn't hesitate. And Doug was on SWAT, he was in investigations, and he did get promoted up to lieutenant. And then he spent 5 years doing some really interesting work as a lieutenant in investigations. And then he retired and he started his company. And he grew up in West Texas. If you're not from Texas, there's this East Texas versus West Texas. It's like you either like one or the other. So in West Texas, they're pretty tough out there. The landscape is very stabby. You have cacti, you have scorpions. It just seems like everything in West Texas wants to hurt you. I'm more of an East Texas, swamp puppies and cypress trees and Spanish moss. It's just more my thing. But I have respect for people that thrive in West Texas because it's not for me. Since he started his company, he's been traveling around the country as an expert witness or helping people, regular people, helping celebrities and high-profile people. He's been super busy, so I was really grateful that he could sit down with me for a few hours, sip a little Irish whiskey, and talk about some of the predators that he's encountered throughout his career.
I don't know, is Doug Deaton. How did you get into police work?
Strangely enough, I did not really care too much for the cops when I was younger. I really didn't. Didn't have a lot of good experiences with the police, when I was younger, mostly because I really wasn't exposed to many people in law enforcement that I was all that impressed with. And strangely enough, also, the first time I actually ran into somebody that I thought was somewhat impressive and professional.
Were you a troublemaker? Is that why you didn't like the police?
I won't go so far as say I was a troublemaker, but I did some things. Yeah, I got chased by the police a couple of times when I was younger, on foot.
On foot?
Yes, on foot.
Did you win? Did you get away?
Yeah, I guess. It wasn't for anything really nefarious, it was just throwing water balloons at cars or, stuff like that. When I was going to college in Denton, Texas, I ran into some police officers there that were pretty professional and didn't come across as overly arrogant or egotistical. You could actually have a real conversation with them, which was really refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, I was working at a pretty good-sized pawn shop in Denton, and there was a retired Fort Worth PD detective who was working there part-time just because he was bored. And so he had been a pawn detective at the end of his career, and that's how he got to know the owner of this place. So that's how he ended up working there. So
okay.
So, had a lot of interaction with that guy. And then also, again, some, burglary and, burglary detectives, pawn detectives, theft detectives, stuff like that would come in there every now and then. And so I had some positive interactions there. So that's what really started to open that up.
You were also on SWAT. So why don't you tell me how you got interested in that?
Back in the 90s, there was a bus taken. Some guy took a bunch of kids or a bunch of people hostage on a bus in Miami, Florida. And this was in the early days of CNN. And so they just showed everything live so I don't remember where I was, but I was watching, so had access to CNN. I was watching this entire incident take place. And so this is kind of in a downtown, very urban area. And, some crazy guy taking over the bus and there was kids on there and the whole thing. And Miami SWAT showed up and they went on there and shot the guy and rescued the kids. And I was watching that and looking at how those guys handled themselves. And I also thought about my grandfather and how he was just a surgeon with a 30-30 rifle, and he would just one shot on everything. He had no patience for you if you couldn't do stuff with one shot. And I remember thinking, I bet my grandfather could have done that. And then at the same time, I started thinking about, I wonder if I could do that. And I started thinking about the discipline that it would take to go into a school bus or into a bus with a whole bunch of innocent people on it and solve that problem in the right way. And what kind of skill set would that require? What kind of training would that take? What kind of patience and mental energy? And I started thinking about all the things that had to go into that.
So you were a student at UNT?
I was. I went to UNT in Denton. Went to Kind of declared my major a little bit later. Didn't really know what I was doing. A little aimless, but I ended up graduating with a degree in criminal justice administration. You and I had that same professor. We found out many, many years later, you and I discovered that we had the same professor. And that's a great example of, even when I was a kid, I had a talent for seeing people for what they really were.
Yeah.
And you and I, turns out, totally independently, had the exact same thoughts and feelings about that guy.
Yeah.
And then later, I'd been a cop for 10 years, maybe, when that all hit.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at it, I was like, I knew it. I knew there was something wrong with that guy. I just knew it.
He had a bunch of child porn.
Yes.
So Quinn, his name was Quinn.
Yes.
I mean, he's convicted. It's not like it's secret.
Yeah, it's out in the open.
I couldn't stand him. He liked talking about bike gangs.
Yes, outlaw
And
motorcycle gangs.
Yes, I think he just liked being with them. And he used that as participant observation.
Even keep in mind, I was probably 20 years old at the time when I went through his class. So absolutely no professional experience of any kind. And I just could tell there was something wrong with him. And there were just a couple of things. I mean, my BS meter was going off pretty hard with the guy, but I didn't know why. I couldn't articulate it like I could later in life. And then there was just the way I said it to you years ago when we first discovered that we both had the same guys. I said, it's like you've gone and stayed in like some disgusting hotel and you took a shower and you can't get that soap off of you. No matter how much you rinse, it's on you, Yeah. And it's that uncomfortable feeling of, God, what is this stuff? What kind of place am I in? That's the feeling that I always got anytime I interacted with that guy. And it turned out we were right.
Yeah.
We were 100% right.
I went for my master's there, and the chair of the department was a guy named Holman, I think. And he wanted me to write my master's thesis off of Quinn's research. It was like, I wanted nothing to do with that guy because I thought I'd be tethered to him throughout my thesis.
Yeah, from then on, your entire master's thesis, tied to that guy.
And then all the other stuff came out, but I don't even remember how I found it. But there he was, a picture of his mugshot, and he'd been arrested.
Popped up in the local news. It was where I saw it. Yeah, I mean, just there it was, and it was, and it wasn't just one or two images. Of course, it's.
Oh yeah.
You know how those kind of cases go. It's typically hundreds of images. So, and I don't remember all the details now, but I remember seeing. Okay, so we're talking about a guy that was, possession of, I don't know if there was distribution involved, but possession of a significant amount of child porn, and enough to get on people's radar, and enough to be successfully prosecuted for it and sent to prison for it. So, yeah, that happened.
So gross.
It's so gross. But so we both went to UNT. So I got a CJ degree at UNT. And to be honest, if I know things have improved quite a bit there with their criminal justice program, knowing everything I know now, if I were to go back and do that all over again at UNT, I probably would have pursued a different degree. Because the truth is that most of the criminal justice stuff that I studied in college, it really didn't make a big difference of any kind in enforcement at all. Had no real effect on anything.
I don't feel like you're even near being an expert in anything if you have a bachelor's degree. There's only so many classes you can take. And then you get into the master's and it's a lot of theoretical stuff and it doesn't even apply to like what I saw in the Ivory Tower, or what I was hearing them talk about and all these theories. That is not what I was seeing firsthand.
Correct.
It just didn't translate.
Well, so I got a master's degree at University of Texas at Dallas and Master of Public Affairs. I went through the local government management track.
No one can call you an underachiever. I didn't know you had that master's.
Yeah, I do. And I was lucky to get into that program. It was very helpful, and I actually have applied quite a bit of that. But within that whole program, though, you have a certain, sort of like a minor, you don't call it that, but it's sort of an undertow. And so I did the emergency management and homeland security thing. And I will freely admit, most of the, to their credit, most of the professors in those classes also freely admitted that they were not practitioners in those fields. So one of the guys that was teaching this, emergency management class, he had zero background in law enforcement, in fire service, in, EMS, nothing. He was a PhD in a subject that he had never actually practiced ever. And in some of those classes, I realized, oh my God, I have far more experience in responding to significant, expanding emergency events than any of the people teaching these classes. It was kind of weird.
Yeah. If that's what you do, you just go undergrad, master's, PhD, teach, then yeah, you don't have any experience if that's all you do.
A significant portion of academia is a system and world unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it's worthless. I'm not saying that, but there are people who get into that system and they realize, okay, the only way I'm going to be successful in this is to go ahead and get that PhD. And then, like you said, they're not going to actually go and be practitioners out of the field. They're looking for a professorship somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, so what are you doing? Well, you're teaching undergrads. Sometimes you teach master's level classes, but it's just a self-perpetuating system.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the thing I was always concerned about. It's like, how does this actually apply in the real world? Where can I use this for practical purposes in my job and in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, a great deal of that MPA program at UTD did help me quite a bit, especially in the latter part of my career. And it's also helping me now, some of the stuff that I do now.
So you started at Highland.
Highland Park.
Highland.
Yes. Very 2.2 square miles of extreme wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the wealthiest people in the world. That's not an exaggeration. Some of the wealthiest people in America, and certainly in the state of Texas. It was a cross-trained department. They called it a public safety style agency. So police, fire, and paramedic.
Right.
Yeah. So I did attend paramedic school. So I was a police officer. I was a firefighter. I was an EMT very briefly, and I attended paramedic school at UT Southwestern Middle School here in Dallas. But and I completed all of the academic part. I was on my last ride out, but I did not sit for the state exam because I got hired by Plano PD. And I had applied at Plano and a couple of other agencies. It was in the hiring process. So I felt really bad about the whole situation because I wanted to leave, but then they sent me to paramedic school. And at the same time, I'm just like, well, I can't not go if I get a job offer. But if I don't get a job offer, well, then I just, I'll stay here. So I was doing all my paramedic stuff.
Why were you looking elsewhere? Was it boring? That could be boring.
It was a good place to start. I learned a lot there. The truth is, at that time, most everybody working there had gone there to retire, to begin their career.
Okay.
And so there were some guys working there that were really accomplished, really solid people who had come from other agencies. And several of them were very blunt with me. And they were like, dude, most people come here to retire. Why are you starting here? You should have started somewhere else. I did get some good experiences there in law enforcement and, a little bit with firefighting, not a whole lot. Going to paramedic school later, I found out it was probably some of the best training I could have had. And so being a firefighter and going to paramedic school and doing EMT stuff helped me a great deal later at Plano when I was on the SWAT team.
Did you have a lot of fires?
No.
Okay. Did they talk to you about not messing up a crime scene as a firefighter?
No, none of that at the time. Of course, keep in mind, this was the 90s.
I don't know if they still, do they now?
I think they do a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe. But of course, the putting the fire out and the patient, that's always a priority.
Yes.
Everything else.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a detective at Richardson Police that actually made a video to try to help the paramedics be able to do what they need to do without destroying evidence. I don't think they watched it.
They probably didn't. Or they probably took it as a, what we're going to do everything this video says, we're going to do just the opposite of that.
Yeah. Screw y'all.
That's right.
Stick it to.
That's right.
So, okay. So you had a career at Plano, and somebody once thought that you hadn't seen much if you were in Plano. You couldn't have.
Yeah. So that it's funny you say that. So just for anybody listening, City of Plano is located north of Dallas. It's in Collin County. Collin County has about 1 million residents now. City of Plano is 72 square miles. The official population hovers somewhere around 300,000. That does not include the daytime population of all the different people who come in there to work at the different corporate headquarters and different corporate campuses. So I don't actually know what the daytime population of Plano is. When I went to work there, I really didn't know a whole lot about it. I had this mental image of this being like this ultra wealthy suburb to the north, this lily white, sort of, protected bubble up there. And when I got there, that's not what I found. at all. And so, again, it is a nice city. I'm not disputing that, but it's sort of a spectrum. Plano, if you look at it on a map, for anybody who's never seen it, just think of a rectangle, laying on its side for the most part. And it runs a spectrum, on the east side or the right side of the rectangle. There's neighborhoods over there where nobody speaks English. Everybody speaks Spanish. Large populations from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador. Couple of pretty good-sized trailer parks over there. Lots of apartment complexes that are notorious for, multiple people living in them. A lot of day labor type guys living there, underprivileged families and so forth, duplexes, things like that. And then as you get closer to the center of the city, it's very plain vanilla, kind of standard American suburbia, very middle class, not ultra wealthy, not poor. And then as you go further to the west, that's where the opulence is.
Mm-hmm.
The far west side of Plano, that's where you have your mega mansions and, your athletes. You have some celebrities that are over there, captains of industry, a lot of the CEOs, CFOs of some of those big corporations that are in Plano, they live over there. So there's some, really, really nice estates and so forth. So it really does run this really nice spectrum from, I don't want to say poverty, but in some cases, yes, in certain areas. And that's not my opinion. That's based on demographic census data that you can dig into, which I did later when I was in grad school. There's also a significant Western Asian population. So you have a lot of Indian families, a lot of Pakistani families, some Eastern Asian population as well. Not nearly as much as say the city of Richardson, which is to the south.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not an exaggeration to say that Plano's sort of a crossroads of the world there.
Mm-hmm.
There's people from all over the country and there's people from all over the world living there.
Mm-hmm.
So you get some really interesting experiences. Just as an example, I wonder how many other Texas cops have been to family violence calls where the root of the dispute in question is about the size of the dowry for the wife and the grandmother of this Indian family that are living together.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to get culturally literate pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I had a great run, just shy of 26 years total.
And the last 5, you had some pretty intense cases.
Yes. So the last 5, I was a lieutenant over crimes against persons in criminal investigations. So I was firmly middle management at that point in my career. So that's the second line supervisor at the Plano PD. So I was in charge of multiple sergeants who were in charge of multiple detectives. Just also though, for any listeners, prior to that, I was a sergeant over the family violence unit as well. So that also handled every offense that people can do to one another within the family. But it also included crimes against children, internet crimes against children, distribution of child pornography. So sometimes human trafficking, prostitution.
You had that under the family violence unit?
Yeah, at that time.
Oh, my.
Yeah, they've split that up since then, but they weren't quite sure where to put it in the organizational structure, so it got put into family violence.
Okay. And so that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. You sent me 3 cases.
Stanley Ledbetter worked as a tax preparation guy.
Okay.
During the day.
Yeah. How you mean like a H&R Block or something?
Yeah, something like that. He worked at a tax preparation place. I mean, just a guy. I don't recall that he had any significant criminal history. I could be wrong about that, but I don't recall that he did. He was well-spoken, articulate guy, originally from Muskogee, Oklahoma, moved down to the Dallas area, became a tax preparation specialist, and was apparently pretty good at that. Regular dude. But he was committing home invasion, robberies, rapes, that kind of thing, hunting human beings up and down the Dallas North Tollway corridor. So all the way from the city of Dallas all the way up into the city of Frisco and everything in between. So we had multiple offenses committed by him in the city of Plano, as well as, again, cities to our south, cities to the north. They got bad enough that I won't call it a task force, but we put together, that all the cities got together and put together a working group to work on all these different offenses.
That'll wrap up our first episode with Doug Deaton. In the next episode, which is available now, we will dive into the Stanley Ledbetter case. This is a horrific case, so if any type of sexual violence is troubling to you, this is not the episode for you. We're not going to go into unnecessary detail, but in order to illustrate the traits of psychopathy of the predator that Stanley Ledbetter displayed, you will hear about the depravity to which he will go unfazed, unaffected, And we will also, of course, discuss ways to avoid somebody like that, including at what point do you take off the gloves and you go for broke? You have to make some hard decisions about how you may come to an end. Is it going to be your decision, or do you leave that decision to a psychopath? Thank you for listening to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. I'm Deborah Dobbs, and until next time, trust your gut and know your exits.